Now I'd like to show you Macintosh in person.
In a U.S.-style show to his glory and that of his creature, he sets out to demonstrate his technological advance, to make interacting with a computer more human at last. On giant screens, we discover its animation and graphics capabilities. For the first time, a computer even lets people draw. By a way of illustration, a portrait of himself. And Jobs is more megalomaniac than ever. Just listen to what he has his machine say.
But right now, I'd like to sit back and listen. So it is with considerable pride that I introduce a man who's been like a father to me, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs can barely hide his emotion, persuaded that his baby will enable him to crush IBM and to become, of course, master of the world.
You see that? He really is pretty much crying.
At 29, Steve Jobs is at the pinnacle of his glory. The Mac and his demonstration are a stroke of genius. He's neither inventor nor engineer, and yet the Mac is his creature, the first personal computer ever. The press is unanimous. It's a revolution, and on the sales front, it's a knockout. Despite its costly sales price, the Macintosh is snapped up. $2,500, twice the price of an IBM machine.
The Macintosh was phenomenally successful early on. It really appealed to a group of people who had not found the computer for them, as Apple used to say, for the rest of us.
What distinguishes the Mac from all its rivals is its extreme user-friendliness. Even a child could use it, all thanks to revolutionary breakthroughs such as the mouse. The mouse, in this form, was totally new, as were the icons, menus, and windows, which appear here on a computer screen for the first time. What makes it all possible is the brain of the Macintosh, its operating system. It's 10 years ahead of its competitors. Steve Jobs is convinced that he's reached the summit, alone and unrivaled. And yet there was a hitch. Blinded by his combat with the giant IBM, he didn't see that another threat was lurking. Its name? Bill Gates, a young computer whiz kid. At 29, he's the same age as Steve Jobs, and he too set up his own company very young, Microsoft. Yet in 1984, the year of the Apple explosion, it was still just a small to medium enterprise.
Microsoft was not the big company that we all know it to be today. It was not this giant monopoly. It was far smaller than Apple at the time.
Unlike Apple, Microsoft doesn't make computers, only applications. It also makes its own operating system. Yet Bill Gates is impressed by the system equipping the Macintosh. He even publicly acclaims it.
Well, to create a new standard, it takes something that's not just a little bit different. It takes something that's really new and really captures people's imagination. And the Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
No one suspects that Bill Gates has a project in mind, to crack the secret of the Macintosh. Under his own brand name, he wants to make a system that is just as developed, with the unavowed intention of selling it to Apple's rivals. But just how will he go about it? For some time, Bill Gates had been working for Apple, supplying them with software. At the time, the company's engineers felt no need to be wary of this small supplier, a fact he would take advantage of by discreetly finding out more about the Macintosh system.
I remember really clearly the very first time we showed Bill Gates a Macintosh. In some sense now, that was showing him his own future.
But it took a while for Apple to cop on to the fact, even though Bill Gates was proving increasingly curious. Everything about the Macintosh fascinated him. He asked a lot of questions, too many questions, to the point that Steve Jobs took him by surprise one day in deep discussion with Andy.
I was about to say, hey, you can even do it on an Apple II, when I think Steve kind of correctly intuited what I was about to say, and so he just yelled, "Shut up!" at the top of his lungs. And like, I guess I didn't signal him that I understood him, so he did it again. "Shut up, even louder. And it's like everyone's looking at him. They finally got the message.
Steve Jobs had reason to be worried, but it was already too late. The damage was done. The bombshell hit a few months later. As if by miracle, PCs had caught up considerably. They had adopted a scroll-down menu and a mouse, all thanks to a new Microsoft program. Bill Gates had just released his own operating system, Windows, directly inspired by the brain of the Macintosh.
Steve found out about the Comdex thing, them announcing Windows. He said something like, I was president. He goes, I want Bill Gates in this office before the sun goes down, or something like that, because he wanted to scream at him about it. But then at this meeting, Steve confronted Bill Gates. Well, you know, you said you weren't copying the Mac. You are copying the Mac. You betrayed us. How can we continue to work with you? How can we trust you? And Steve, you know, in any case, is really hard to stand up against. He can be very persuasive and very forceful. But I remember being extremely impressed at Bill Gates not giving an inch and just standing right up to him and you know, justifying himself.
Bill Gates had pulled it off. Windows would rapidly equip most of the computers on the planet at a price to beat all comers. For Apple, it was a disaster. Macintosh sales collapsed within weeks, and Steve Jobs' lucky star seriously began to fade.
Suddenly, for the first time in their history, they're really starting to worry about what would happen to the company because people weren't buying the Mac.
To get out of this crisis, John Sculley, remember him? The guy Steve Jobs hired 2 years previously, was to take a measure thus far unthinkable. He fired the father of the Macintosh, Apple's historic founder. For Steve Jobs, it was a cruel disappointment. Banished from his own company at the age of 30.
It was unthinkable what happened. You know, it really was. It was something you never could have conceived because he was so core to what the place was. It just didn't make sense.
What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months.
The year is 1985, and Steve Jobs even envisages quitting Silicon Valley for good, doing something else. But he's a fighter, an extraordinary entrepreneur, so he sets up a new IT company called Next. In a sense, the follow-on to Apple. A year later, he buys Pixar Studios from George Lucas, which at the time was just a small special effects company. Pixar would go on to produce Toy Story, Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, films that would revolutionize the world of animation. Once again, the man had flair. Years go by, Steve Jobs continues to develop new technologies, still with the somewhat crazy hope of changing the world. We met him in 1992 in his new offices in Silicon Valley. And as you'll see, back then he was already imagining the 21st century.
What is my dream today? This is a very French question. I guess I think computers are just in their infancy today. So maybe they've come this far in the last 30 years. Everyone having a computer isn't enough anymore. We have to have them start to work together to do some amazing things.
Steve Jobs, as visionary as ever. Only 37 years old, he still has the time to create all that he has in mind. In the meantime, in the mid-90s, Bill Gates has taken his place. His company, Microsoft, has an undivided grip over the IT world. It's a phenomenal economic powerhouse and a quasi-monopoly. 97% of the world computers run his Windows system. On the other hand, since Steve Jobs' departure, Apple has continued to lose ground. The firm is sorely in need of renewal. Its market share collapsed to only 3%. On February 5th, 1997, a Business Week headline reads, "The Fall of an American Icon."
Apple was really on a spiral towards its demise. It had gone through a number of leaders. None of them had been successful. people had lost confidence in it. Even loyal customers and fans were beginning to switch to regular PCs.
At the time, Apple has just hired a new CEO, Gilbert Amelio. John Sculley, Jobs' sworn enemy, has been shown the door. Gilbert Amelio decides to risk his all. He plays his last card, calling upon the man of the moment, the guru of the company's beginnings, symbol of Apple's golden age, Steve Jobs. He's now 42, and as always, he's got a head full of ideas. August '97, the founder signs his return with a mega show worthy of the good old days. Awaited like the Messiah by the brand's remaining loyal fans, Steve Jobs announces a rescue package to pull Apple back from the brink, and it kicks off with a dramatic turn of events.
I'd like to announce one of our first partnerships today, a very, very meaningful one, and that is one with Microsoft.
The audience is stunned.
I know.
Some think it's a joke, but Steve Jobs is dead serious.
Rather than repeating history, I'm extremely proud of both companies that they have resolved these differences in a very, very professional way. And I happen to have a special guest with me today via satellite downlink. And if we could get him up on the stage right now.
And here's his special guest, the man who betrayed him a few years earlier, Bill Gates.
Good morning.
For the booing audience, Gates is the devil incarnate.
Some of the most exciting work that I've done in my career has been the work that I've done with Steve on the Macintosh.
The two arch enemies have done the unthinkable and signed a secret agreement resolving their differences. Steve Jobs drops all legal proceedings against Bill Gates, whom he had accused of copying his Macintosh. In return, Bill supplies Steve with programs for his computers and a nice fat check for $150 million. It looks very much like a pact with the devil, but Steve Jobs is willing to do anything to bring Apple back from the brink.